Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Marcus, TCG Discussions, and we're back with a discussion video today. Today's topic, I want to say, is kind of inspired by Crossworld and the most recent video about Red Syn. So, shout outs to Team Crossworld and Joey for posting the video. But he asked for an opinion, and I'm not necessarily making this in response to that. I guess you could kind of say that it seems like that, but that's not it. It's just a genuine reflection on the state of Syn in the game. And I've kind of talked about this previously in some of my videos, but I wanted to go into more depth here. And this is something that I think I can do with other decks about, the state of the game and how, like, certain decks are functioning both on ban list and in response to the whole, meta shift with the dash packs coming out and where decks stand. So this is going to be just a more inside look into the deck versus just like a overall, like, where does it stand in the meta and all this other stuff. So as I stated before in my previous ban list discussion videos, I thought that Syn is no longer a top red deck in the game. It might be third. It might be third among the red decks if you count Vegito as a red deck, which I do. Whatever the color of the leader is, to me, that's, the color of the deck that it is. Even though Vegito's kind of a rainbow deck, it can play a lot of cards. But, I would say that, like, SS4 Goku, for example, but Bardock is a black rainbow deck. But I'd still use black as like the primary, like, definitive thing, because if there are specific cards that like require your leader to be black in order to play them, I think that makes like your deck a black deck, and generally most of the cards in there are going to be black. Now, that's not the case for Vegito by a long shot, because most of the colors in there are not, but that's because of the permanent of the leader, the card pool, and the ability to abuse that card pool in such a brilliant fashion. So, Vegito aside, we're here to talk about Syn, and why I think that Syn, while not being a dead deck by any stretch of the means, is not a high tier competitive deck anymore. And it translates into what I think are quite a elaborate package of game state understandings that require you to really gotta kind of have to like grasp this in order to like understand where your deck, is in the games, like the meta, and how the game state of what your deck's designed to do is functioning against the rest of the meta. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with the biggest issue that is obvious, is that Haze has been removed. So Haze is a card that draws a card. It's a card that is a 1-drop in your hand, and it gives your Shadow Dragons crit. And now, with it being banned, you can solve one of these problems by replacing it with another 1-drop, Syn Shenron, my Pilaf, just to name a few cards, that draw a card. And this is most competently played off of your Unison. So your Unison giving you that free plus that translates to you drawing a card. It's pretty strong, right? Now, one is that the Haze directly searched your Dragon Ball. And this is kind of a big deal. So it's not that Syn cannot awaken on turn 2, because it certainly can. It's that Oceanus, for the early game's consistency of what your deck is trying to do, the game state of what your deck is trying to achieve, that is kind of a problem, because there are not other direct searchers that you can replace it with. Like, for example, if there was a card that gave your Shadow Dragons double strike, but then you it had like all the same effects as Haze, that it was an activate battle, whatever, that also searched a cracked Dragon Ball. That would be a very suitable replacement. Okay, but it's not that, and the Natron Shenron's not that, and there are no other cards like that really in the game, and so that's kind of a problem. And then secondly is Haze's ban translates into an issue of not giving your cards crit. And this flows directly into the second issue with the deck, and that is resource management in an aggro deck. So there are three things that have to be present for an aggro deck to be good. The first is that it must play very strong, tall cards effectively, or it has to play a myriad of smaller cards that can go very wide for little to nothing. So an example of tall is Dark Brawly. Okay, I mean, it could kind of do both back in the day, but right now, given the fair and balanced state that it is, it would be Dark Brawly. You can play a 30k card for 1 energy that does effects. Very cool, right? But then another example of wide would be, would be Vegeks, right? You mill the top 3 cards, all 3 of them are cards that come into play for free, and then just directly translate into like a Vegeta attack, your leader attack, Gotenks attack, and the super combo Mai basically that can help apply that pressure, Trunks blocker, so on and so forth. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about with the wide aspect. All those cards come in for free, so anything else that you're investing your energy into the turn, right, are additions on top of that. And that's what makes cards like Piccolo and the Black Trunks that plays itself from the warp very effective cards, because for 2 energy you get 2 attacks at 20k, and they get their myriad of effects, either resources gained or resources generated back to you in the drop. So when you look at that on top of the free play, it can be pretty good. And so that is the first component. The second component is hand resource management. So back when Storm was a thing, Storm was able to generate pluses while playing cards that swung at you. And because it was primarily played in a blue leader, you were able to get those resources back because you're blue. And this was an extremely potent combination of cards that could come together like this. Because basically what you said to your opponent was, I'm going to play this 1-drop Bardock that basically nets me a card while being aggressive with my Hirudegarn that will untap energy, and to top it off, that Bardock can then, for a combo on top of it, translate into an ape that stands itself and will become a blocker for me on the next turn, and will become a 20k double strike. And then when you untap your 2 energy with Hirudegarn, you can continue to extend those plays outward. And the same thing with the Trunks version of that, but it was a little less effective because of the lack of untap. So you had a really potent, really potent combination of cards, on top of cards like the Goten promo that would allow you to swing, look at the top 3, add cards to your hands, So if you could then play the Bardock, swap for free into Goten, you basically drew 2 cards for playing that 1, and then if you had another energy, you could play down another Bardock, take another life, play down another Goten, draw you more cards. So you can see how this like starts to become an issue, right? Like, my opponent just got 2 cards from their life and 2 cards from their deck, and they've swung at me now 4 times, right? Twice from the Bardock, twice from the Goten, all in the investment of 2 energy, not including anything else that they're doing. And, if they combo over them, do the whole 9 yards. And so this could translate into quite the problem, especially with blue that could then untap energy, right? And Hirudegarn being an on-tap leader just was kind of a very potent fit. Not to mention the super combo at the time was like groundbreaking in pluses. Like you could pitch a card, draw 2, and then add another card off of like the legs or something. It's like something that like searched out the legs searched out like another card or something like that. I can't remember. Maybe it was like a Tapion that searched out the legs, and so basically you got a bunch of extra free pressure, right? So outlining that, that's the second one, which is hand resource management. If you have an aggressive deck that does not generate that hand resource management to like increase your hand size to 1A, keep your aggression going, and 2, give you pressure to put or cards and resources to defend yourself, then you've probably lost the game. Okay, your deck is just going to peter out and do nothing. A great example of this is probably like the SS4 Goku changing history or something deck. That right there is a great example of a deck that's like trying to be aggro and failing on all fronts once it awakens, because it's not doing, like, basically the Vegex engine of the deck that you would play no longer functions on the backside because the leader's not bursting any cards. So that kind of sucks. And you're just eventually going to peter out because you're not getting free resources out of your deck that you normally would. And to top it off, you're not generating, those extra pressure pluses to compensate for your low hand size because your deck doesn't generate a lot of hand advantage. So very problematic. And the third is that for an aggressive strategy, it has to have a very coherent and succinct flow to the deck that, if interrupted, can be repeatable so that your opponent loses the game. And Syn now kind of fails at 2 of these 3 things if certain conditions are met. And here's why. So, to the first part, right? Basically, your deck has to, when it comes to Syn, your deck has to basically play this game where, 1, you want to consistently get these Dragon Balls in your hand. You want to do it in a pretty timely fashion too, because the last thing you want to do is have your opponent get, like yellow, for example, get like Slug online and like things start to go south. Because now like you're going to run into a whole different issue, which is just straight bad for your deck. 2, if your deck, the longer the game goes against aggro, the harder it should be for you to defeat your opponent. Because you're basically trying to blitz them before they can stabilize. And Syn, thankfully, right, though, did not lose any of its aggro pieces. So it didn't lose Dredge, and it didn't lose the A-Drop. Didn't lose Nova, and it didn't lose the little crit guy, although not many people play the crit guy. And so it, however, is going to fail basically all 3 of these with just simply the Haze being removed, and fails it in quite like an effective manner. So it doesn't fail going tall at all. It doesn't fail going wide really at all either. But how it fails the first part is that, and this is kind of like a subsection that I'm going to talk about in the third, which is removal. And what Syn's decision-making patterns have to be going forward with that. And this all ties back to Haze. So let's get to it. With Dredge and the A-Drop, right? Haze was the pillar that like really pushed the deck over the edge. You would play the Dredge Destroyer and then swing for 30k double strike crit with like a Deluge or a super combo on top of it. And what you're doing on that second turn when you've played Gogeta Unison searched the top 3 for a deck, preferably your SCR, and then decided that you're going to, play Dredge after standing your leader in an energy, play down the Haze, draw a card, right? And keep in mind, you've generated over 2 turns 6 extra cards in your hand through the Cracked Dragon Balls. You draw in another card off the Haze Shenron. So it replaces the fact that it's been played out of your hand. So to me, that's a +1. And then to top it off, you got that top 3 search. And then you draw for a Dredge Destroyer, that's another plus. And then you can use your leader effect, once awakened, to minus that Dredge Destroyer after it's attacked. And then minus another card, it's another loss to your opponent. All while putting on 20, 30k double strike crit. So if they don't want to take it, they have to either at least spend a card for a negate if they have the energy open. So that's another minus to them while you've generated like 5 or 6 cards in a turn. And then you would then maybe pose the question, or do you want to combo out of this, which is going to cost you more cards? And if you were at Nats, or in general, maybe in your local play, if, you're playing SS4 Gogeta and you swing for 30 or 40 double strike crit on like your second turn, I'm just going to take it, right? Like, I'm going to draw 17 cards in my next turn anyway. Not really, but I'll draw probably up to like 12 or 13 cards. I'm not really going to care that I don't get those 2 cards unless like it's like my SCR, and yeah, like that's like the only thing that I care about that you create out of my life. So but the reality is that it fails this first part because Haze was such a pivotal piece to this, okay? And then this, again, just directly goes into the second part, right? Your deck has to have a repeatable flow. And this repeatable flow kind of, I guess this is a little bit of, 2 and 3 kind of like combined into it. But the high repeatable strategy does still exist, right? You still can always play the 8-drop. You can always play the Dredge Destroyer. But there's an issue with 2 and 3 that are very problematic for Syn into turn 4. So the thing is that you have to generate that hand advantage like I talked about and be able to maintain that hand size, which you do almost immediately with the deck, right? But you have to keep the train rolling. Keep the train rolling. Fuel the coal into the engines. Keep this gravy train rolling, right? So that's part 2. And then part 3 is that coherent, concise strategy that's going to allow you to keep this pressure repeating. So this is like Nova. This is like Dredge Destroyer and the 8-drop. Those cards didn't go anywhere. So if they didn't go anywhere, why am I saying that this is a problem? Well, Haze is the backbone of all of that in a lot of ways. Haze is a card that draws a card. So by drawing a card, it is also netting you more cards to be aggressive, right? It's also a consistency piece of the flow of the deck. So those 6 cards that you get for free? Well, there's one less searcher for those 6 cards, which means if you play a 60-card deck, there are less options for you to hit that right away. There's the consistency part. And then there is the biggest issue, and that is removal. Okay? And unfortunately for Syn, Bandai and Fighters Ambition released Black Smoke. And Black Smoke creates a myriad of problems for the deck, and or if you can kill the unison through aggression that your deck naturally does, and or other, through other means of getting rid of their board. And I will give you an example of how easy this is to do here in a bit. But for those of you who would be questioning, right, well, killing a unison doesn't seem feasible if it has 4 markers, without Black Smoke, and that seems like a very, niche way to get rid of the strategy and stop the strategy cold in its tracks. Well, you may not be so quick to say that if you just analyze blue's strategy against red the entire time that Goji unison is present, right? Obviously, blue is successful. No one's going to say it's not. And you can just see that playing that 15k unison with 4 markers is just basically free board establishment while getting rid of a card that is going to be aggressive against them in the future. And so let's talk about the Gogeta unison for a second. What does it do? It's all of what I said before. It's that free top searchers, the free +2, +1, +2 actually to play that 1-drop. And Haze was a card that drew a card and then translated to crit, but you can supplement with other 1-drops. You know, like I said, my Pilaf and you know, anything that you can, and the Natron Shenron to name a few replacements. But what happens when that unison isn't there? Like, let's just remove the unison for a second. So if I spend 4 attacks to kill it on my second turn, which is pretty doable, actually, if you stop and think about it. Blue, for example, on their second turn, if they play down like a 1-drop, okay, they could swing into it with leader. They could play a Piccolo, which could swing twice, and then which could play a Pan, and then they could combo up the Pan with like 2 other Saiyans and just to 15 and kill the unison. And then there you go. Blue on turn 2 for Crimson has just dealt with that unison. Green can swing one time at it, combo the Gohan rare, and just effectively kill it. Black can basically do a myriad of the same things. It can do the same thing that I just outlined with like the Trunks. If it had a cantrip that it played or something, if like, for example, if you play DMS, right, Dark Black Power Mass Saiyan, and just left it sit there, now they've probably killed it with the what is it, the leader effect, so on and so forth. But you can see how you can get rid of it. Yellow, especially Trunk Sheeta, can kill that thing immediately. They Trunk Sheeta can generate a lot of attackers, and its leader can just straight double strike on its first attack once it's awakened, and we'll have enough battle cards present to remove the unison. So now what have you done? Well, the Oceanus, the Mai, the Pilaf, you know, the Natron Shenron, any of those cards that you have in your hand are now very, very questionable. Because as an aggro strategy, what are the cards you're trying to play? You're trying to play Dredge. You're trying to play Intensifying Power Trunks. You're trying to play Nova. You're trying to play the Omega. So if you're not playing any of those cards, what are you doing? You're not being an aggro deck, which translates to what? Nothing. It's just basically a free pass to your opponent. Now, if you're trying to play the long game, right, and you have like a Shin Noble Supremacy in hand, you may be like saving some of that energy back from aggression to straight up tell your opponent with the top end that that's not going to happen on this next turn. So chill out with that. That's fine. And might be there against blue. But if you're not blue and your opponent's, you know, top end doesn't get affected by Shin or any of these other cards you're playing, like Pilaf or whatever, what are you doing? Right? Are you really playing Oceanus to draw one? And what, maybe give your other Dredge that now you've played in your hand to draw another card barrier? So you basically exchange 1 for 1 and then draw an off Dredge. Okay? But, and then what have you not done? Right? So if you're going to turn 3 after I've killed your unison and you play that Oceanus, guess what you're not doing? You're not playing Dredge, and you're not playing the you're not playing Dredge, and you're not playing the Omega. And if the Unison was there, you could do all of that while still plussing, right? Or if the Dredge was still there, you could play the Nova next to the Omega and get 2 more attacks, have the Dredge, have the Unison, have the Leader, so on and so forth. So it spills over into a lot of translation because it poses a lot of questions to the other cards in your hand and how good they are and whether or not they're effective or do anything. Secondly, basically all the cantrips in the deck translate to replacements. They are +1s that are meant to get you to other cards, whether that be defensive resources or more offensive resources. It contributes to that second factor that I talked about, consistency. And so, much like Storm, you generate a lot of cards, and your other cards generate you other cards, and this keeps the train rolling. And while getting to go wide, right? And simply killing the Unison is enough to pose all those questions to all those cards. Like, what are you doing? Like, now what? If you have to reestablish a Unison on your 3rd turn, you have now just effectively eliminated the 30k from coming down. Unless for some reason your opponent went, balls to the wall aggro and just hit you down to like 3 and you can Z-Awaken. And then there's the issue of, if that's the case and you do it so that you can establish it, what happens if this cycle repeats itself on the next turn? And now by turn 3, right, in Gogeta, it's not such a niche answer, right? It's not such a niche answer anymore because Gogeta's drawn now like 5 cards over 2 turns without spending an energy. If I draw 5 cards every turn out of my deck, at least, I guarantee you I'm going to see that black smoke. And then I'm going to get into like I said, I'm going to get into a more niche combo to handle the removal. But the last thing that this, is, so there's a huge resource energy issue here. And back when Storm was a thing, because you were playing a blue leader at that untapped 2 energy, this was far less problematic. Okay. And because Syn is not a deck that gets its energy back, you have a lot of questions that you want to pose, right? If you're playing all these 1-drops, the next question is can you deal with what your opponent's going to do? Which you have to do. Like as an aggro deck, you're supposed to go aggro, right? But if it just costs you the game for doing that, then you're going to lose, right? So if you have defensive cards, and this has happened, man. This is one of the biggest weaknesses I've said of Syn all along. If you weather to turn 4 or 5, and you have 4 or 5 life against Syn, you have won the game. And the reason is because all those cards that they've drawn are probably, half of them are extra cards. Probably half or a little under half are extra cards. And to make it worse, they're not just extra cards, they are cards that are not contributing to the overall strategy, which is aggro. Right? So without it, you're just really posed with a lot of questions on, well, what now? What next? What do I do? And then the worst part about all this, okay, and this is where I think Syn was definitely better than Storm, right, is that the removal of Haze now denies your opponent the option of being forced, right? Well, I should probably word this better. With Haze's presence, your opponent was forced to either spend cards or take damage. that is not going to translate to them getting more cards. And now they can just not care. The only thing they have to care about is whether or not this next attack will kill them in order to defend themselves, or it's going to set them in a position that's bad for their strategy. Do you think that SS4 Gogeta cares at being at 3 life? No, it doesn't. So if you strike me with a double strike and then you strike me with a triple strike, you've given me 5 cards. If you've invested any amount of cards into those attacks, you've just given me 5 cards. And now I can play my defensive game. Especially because we have blocker negates in the game now that take it 5 life. Even getting down to 5 is kind of like a defensive, standpoint for a lot of decks. Because we're going to take that life, we're going to stop the attack, we're going to play a blocker, we're just going to pose a question to the rest of it. Now, here's the thing, man. Let's be real here. Syn doesn't really care about you playing those blockers, right? Because they're going to just kill it with a leader or rush Vegeta or whatever. And just make those attacks bad. But, big but, let's be real. Yeah, let's just be real for a second. If you give your opponent all of those cards, they are going to have a myriad of defense for you. If you think that blue and yellow aren't just going to just straight up stop what you're doing for the rest of the game after giving them 5 cards on top of whatever their deck does, and they get to turn 3 or 4 and put a Boo Unison on the board, your entire day is bad. It's bad. It's real bad. Okay? And they're not going to care. SS4 Gogeta is not going to care. Like, other Syn decks are not going to care. Vegito certainly doesn't have to care. Right? Like, there's lots of top decks. Barris doesn't care. Barris was already trying to play the long game anyway. The only thing you've done is given them more cards to enable them to do that. And talking about that turn 4 or 5 issue, well, in terms of resource management, you're still at 8 life, 7 life, 6 life, whatever. I've never attacked your leader so that you don't get in blocker range to really awaken. And to top it off, since you're not going to be a Z leader until I'm pretty much ready to end you and or just outright win the game through some other condition, I think I'll bide my time and I'll just take the damage. Whereas Haze forced the issue for your opponent to say spend cards or take this damage that's not going to translate to more cards. And that trade-off, is extremely problematic. So if you're at 5 life, for example, and I swing with my triple striker and you don't negate, and then I activate Haze and super combo twice to 50k triple strike critical, or deluge into super combo for 50 triple strike critical, oh yeah. Yeah, Houston, we got a problem. We got a big problem. Now Rush Attack Vegeta is lethal, Dredge Destroyer is lethal, the triple strike is lethal, the Z Awaken leader is lethal. There's a lot of problems. You got a lot of problems, okay? And that's just providing that you didn't get the blocker negate in time or what have you, right? So, yeah. Pretty big deal, right? You can see what I'm saying here. Whereas before, it's like, well, now I'm at from 5 to 2, but I got 3 more cards in hand, and he just spent a super combo and something else, and he's tapped out for the turn. It might not be so bad, right? And that big difference is what I'm talking about. And it translates to an issue that directly influences that removal aspect. And that is the deck does not have very effective ways to generate more cards outside of its first 2 turns. Right? It is very reliant on the Gogeta Unison, which is one of the primary reasons that I talked about killing it right away. Right? Never mind Black Smoke. Black Smoke can chill in a corner for a second. But the thing is that you can see that if the Unison can be gotten rid of in any way, all those 1-drops in hand are very problematic because you're not contributing to the strategy, which is being aggressive. It's posing questions to the other cards that you want to play. It's one thing if you don't have those pieces, right? So if like all you have is the 1-drops, and yeah, you might as well invest them, use those cards as combo defense and whatever, draw, and then, maybe try your luck on the next turn. But what have you just done? In an aggro deck, you've passed the turn without killing anybody or attacking, really, at all. Secondly, and, also in the mirror, Syn is very good at getting rid of the unison. So, secondly, is the fact that resource management is basically the end of Syn. It's actually what ends up killing the deck in the end. It has to basically focus on all of this aggression early in order to not allow your deck to stabilize. If blue gets to boo unison, right, even if they ramp it, right, if there's a ramp deck that can do it on turn 3, which bears can do it on turn 3, Android 16, Android 21, the Kai, Blue Goku, all these ramp strategies can get to boo on turn 3. You put that card on the board, oh boy. Houston, we got major problems. Trunks Jita has a barrier blocker that you're not getting rid of in any timely fashion, right? You can't even Wolf Fang the dang thing out of the way. So all your big bombs, like your triple strikers, just get eaten up by that blocker. They don't care. They don't care. They drew 2 cards. Like they drew 3 cards in their turn. They really do not care. And then to make it worse, Trunks Jita is going to get more aggressive. Thank you, Dash Packs. But like all this investment for no crit return. Whereas when the crit exists, they were like, I may not, I don't know. Kind of weird. And, especially having Gohan super combo, card just wins games. But you can see what I'm talking about, right? You can see how just getting rid of the unison is a problem. But I haven't even talked about what happens if you get rid of the unison in the rest of their board. Or at least the very problematic cards. Because let's face it, their primary things are like into turn 2, if they play the unison variant. The only card that they really want to play is Dredge Destroyer. So that's 1 battle card. The next turn, if Dredge Destroyer is still there and you don't play a second Dredge Destroyer, it's either 8-drop and Dredge Destroyer or 8-drop and Nova Shenron. Both have their myriad uses, but to me, I effectively like to play Nova more because it draws me cards. But what happens when you get rid of all of it? Right? Let's just talk about a very easily complicated scenario where you have, by turn 3, a Dredge Destroyer, an Omega, a Nova Shenron, or another Dredge Destroyer. You can take your pick. I don't care. In a unison. I can effectively get rid of 3 of those cards with just 1 Black Smoke and 1 Dark Brawly, which is the most popular overrun played right now in all of the game. And this is not including any effects of other cards that I have. For example, Blue Gohan. For example, the Green Gohan. For example, Cell, which just gets rid of, 2 of those cards right away, while being a dual attack card against the unison. Without, just straight up killing it with it, again, you see the problem here, right? Let's say Crimson Crew. If Crimson Crew's awakened on turn 3, which is pretty feasible for it to do, especially if you've attacked them with all those cards, it's going to be very easy for them to do, right? They could play on their 3rd turn Black Smoke, then swing, untap, draw. And, if they awaken on turn 3, this is going to be even more, right? Because they're going to untap another one, draw 3. That Black Smoke was effectively free, right? And then if they have enough cards, which they're going to have basically enough with their leader if they wanted to invest in a Dark Brawly, which they play two of in the deck, right? If they drew that in Black Smoke, and they play the Black Smoke, so they got rid of your unison, they play Dark Brawly, which just murdered your 8-drop, sent that straight to the warp. And then now Dark Brawly can swing at the Dredge Destroyer. The leader can now swing at the Nova Shenron. And this has costed them nothing, right? When you swing with the Nova Shenron on their turn, if you swung at Nova Shenron with Nova Shenron and they had an energy up, they could bottom deck it with Beerus. Destroys. And like, okay, so the entire board has literally been outed. Pretty much. Right? And if it's double dredge, then one of the dredges is getting attacked out with Dark Brawly. So if you don't stop the attack with some other card, right? And if you're at high life total, guess what's not happening? You're really not stopping it without like After Image Technique or something in your hand and 5 cards in the drop. So that's a no-go. That's not happening. Houston, we've got problems there. And now you're forced to, spend a super combo or something and another card out of your hand to protect a Dredge Destroyer, which you're probably not going to do. So we've got now Brawly removed, 8-drop removed because of Brawly, Dredge Destroyer dead because of Brawly, Black Smoke dead because of Mr. Black Smoke dead, Gogeta Unison dead because of Mr. Black Smoke, sorry, had it backwards, and the leader can still attack the 4th card. If on turn 3, you do all that, and you have 4 life left, after Awakening with Crimson, and you have, all the cards you have that you've drawn throughout the turns and whatnot, yeah, you've won the game. Your opponent's lost. There's nothing really to do. And before you're like, oh, well, you could turn 4 SCR. No, you can't. You actually can't. Oh, well, we might, they probably, all this other stuff. No, right? And then they're probably going to also play a Piccolo, which has dual attack, which will swing at another, like the Dredge Destroyers some more. It's going to cost you more cards because they're going to play a pan and draw a card, and they're going to, not more pluses that way. You see what I'm saying? So they have 1 energy up. And your Vegeta's not going to do anything. Right? Like, now with Gohan and Bean, right, even at 1 energy at 3, if you invested all 4 energy into your SCR, which is a 1-of in your deck, and then you played it and swung, and it was 40k triple, and, your leader's minus 5, whatever, and you try to all in that, and then they just bean twice, and then play the new Gohan rare to bottom deck that card, then you've lost. And then now turn 4 is what? Right? I've just mapped out a very easy way for Crimson and most blue decks for you to effectively kill that. Well, Crimson's a little different because it gets to untap that other energy, but it all still remains the same. Not much changes in the play patterns. And it's even worse if Boo Unison was played. It's actually even worse if Boo Unison is played for ramp decks, because now that SCR is certainly not going to be played. Your 8-drops now require you basically to have the the Oceanus, otherwise they're getting bottom deck. They still could peel off the card and it's still blue. So it's not a good look, man. It's not a good look. And like green, the same thing, right? If they establish their Unison, whatever it may be, if they have one or play one in the strategy, like Charismatic Villain will just wipe out most of the cards that you want to play that aren't the 8-drop or your SCR. And again, like, it's not like they don't have just negates, right? It's not like you probably put them in blocker range, right? Or, Shocking Death Ball or something else. Like Shocking Death Ball against Syn and Nova is really strong. It's a really strong interaction. And so there's this plateau that is hit. And once it hits that, it actually then just starts to cave. And Syn just has a lot of problems, right? A lot of problems. Because, again, when you're supposed to be investing in all this aggression, you're supposed to generate cards to be able to defend yourself. If you have to constantly defend yourself against your opponent's, strategies, and you're starved of resources and attempting to preserve your aggressive pieces and your consistency pieces, or your consistency pieces require a high amount of energy investment in a deck that's not going to return it back to you, it's very problematic. Like, take Hurrigarn Storm, for example. When I outlined the Bardock play into Goten and the Bardock play into Goten, that is hand resource generation that does not have a high level of investment in a deck that can also untap to energy and is blue. If you take Syn, for example, this would be probably the only, like, this would probably be like the only primary thing going for Hurrigarn Storm over Syn is that piece that I outlined right there. Whereas now, you kind of see the problem, right? Like, oh boy. And if blue is ever in a compromising position with multiple energy up and 3 energy up, okay, guess what's probably also in their hand that's going to stop your 8-drop? Good old Dirty Burst. And yellow's not going to have a care in the world with half the things that it has to stop. I mean, there's Nimbus, which just basically says that the majority of what you're trying to do, no. And this is the final part about getting rid of the Unison, man. It's not just a consistency piece for all those 1-drops. It's also a -4 threat, right? And the -4 threat and activate battle is a pretty big deal. I will not plus my Unison if that -4 threat is in range. I will swing with it first and ask my opponent what they think I'm going to do, right? Not what are you going to do about it. I'm going to ask you, what do you think I'm going to do? And do you think that if you think I'm going to -4 this thing, do you think that that is going to end you, or it's something that you can take? That's what I'm asking my opponent. And without that piece, it's just another layer of the aggro aggression piece that Syn just doesn't have. Now, Syn definitely checks rogue decks. Like, bad rogue decks, you've lost. But against top meta decks, I just don't think Syn has the power anymore. I think that it's very lacking. And with God Sealing Band for green, I suspect that Cell will come back, especially with all the new pieces it's got. It's got so many nice new pieces going for the deck. And I can honestly tell you, Cell has absolutely no qualms with destroying the board that is Syn Shenron. None at all. Okay? Even on, like, I'm not sure, the turn it awakens, definitely no problems. Right? Your Nova can be popped, your 8-drop can be popped, your Dredge Destroyers can be attacked at by the leader. And if they go up the chain at all, they are definitely swinging multiple 20Ks at your blockers. And they only have to combo the Gohan to just straight minus it. So, yeah. And I've already outlined yellow's yellow. It's just going to be what it's going to be. But yeah, this is kind of my problem with Syn. And I knew I could make a long video about this one, so I wanted to. And just kind of explain the main reasons why Syn, to me, is not, if it is top 3, it is number 3 of the red decks, and I don't think that it's very good anymore. I think it has a lot of good things going for it. I just think that without Haze, and there being no good replacement for it, and the Crit Frieza is not a good replacement, for the record. And I don't have to play it to even explain why. It's actually very easy. So if you outline the turns that I've talked about, right, which are very standard or optimal that you'd want to see, which is, again, less consistent now because of the fact that the Haze is like the Haze doesn't have that Dragon Ball search, which is so crucial. Crit Frieza poses the same problem as any one drop in your hand. Do I want to now invest all in on this one attack by sacrificing a play of a Nova, which translates to 2 attacks and draw a card, and a Dredge Destroyer, which is draw a card, or a Dredge Destroyer, which is draw a card and 20k double? That's a very big problem, right? Having to make that choice to give a card crit when, again, depending on what is in your opponent's hand, it's either just going to be removed or stopped in a very bad way. Yeah, it could hurt. And it's a card that has a combo cost attached to it. And a deck that generally doesn't have anything really going for it when it comes to the combo cost department. Which means, defensively, it's a nightmare for you. Especially if you play Beerus Super Combo. And so, with that, with there being no good suitable replacement, I wish this is going to sound terrible, but I almost wish they would come out with a promo that does the same thing as Haze, but like it's for Double Strike. And I think that would immediately put Syn back in the driver's seat of top red. But the crit prop, but Double Strike, while very annoying for what that deck does, that and critical are 2 different things. Crit swings are way worse to take than Double Strike swings because you get more cards to be able to do something about the next attack, or they get to put you in range of your blocker negates more, so on and so forth. Now, obviously, it would be very strong with like the 15k ice, but let's be real. It's not like that card couldn't use a buff anyway, and like Ice and Nova would be the only real benefactors other than maybe, if you wanted to, Oceanus. They would be the only real benefactors of a card like that versus the other cards that were 20k double and 30k triple. You feel me? So it would have a different dynamic, and I feel that it would kind of help bring Syn back while being a little bit more balanced with its aggression. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth breakdown of why like Syn is not really as good as it used to be. And I think it's a bad deck, no. But if I had to give it a tier, I'd give it a 1.5. Because it's just, it's missing a lot. It's missing a consistency piece. It's missing a primary generator to its aggro and a vital part of its aggro that does not have a very suitable replacement, or a card that maybe did the function the same way and can find a good home in the deck. It's just very, very difficult. And so with all those reasons, that is my answer to, is Syn a good deck? The answer is yes, it is good against anything that is not top meta. And against top meta, it is struggling. And between Syn and Gogeta, it is not close anymore. Syn is not better than Gogeta. I'm sorry. It's just not. I didn't think it was before, and I certainly don't think it is now. So that's pretty much it for this. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts, if you've tested with Syn or where you think Syn is in the meta. And I will see you guys next time. This is Alex from TCG Discussions. There it is. Alex. Sorry. Marcus. I'm so used to that. I am so used to that outro. Oh, there was one more thing I forgot. If you guys could pray for me and my wife. We both have had COVID this last week. We're on the up and up, but we've had some cough and congestion stuff in our lungs, and it's one of those things where the doctor said, hey, you guys need to take some like decongestion stuff because that can develop into pneumonia, and we don't want pneumonia. So keep us in your thoughts and prayers. If you guys who are close to me, who watch the channel, you guys have kept me in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you so much. This is Marcus signing off, and I will see you guys next time. Laters.